This is hot off the press, I guess. It's about a week old. I've been making a lot of videos, so I got a bit distracted. I've been meaning to put this one up. I think as soon as I put Kevin Rudd's speech up, a few guys out there that either swing right or left or Liberal or Labor, I think it's pretty important that you guys see that all sides of Australian politics agree that China is the biggest threat to Australia. This is a speech that Malcolm Turnbull gave in the US only about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago now, and he described the Thucydides trap. If you don't know about that, watch the video and go all the way to the end. You got to read between the lines. Malcolm Turnbull has pretty much suggested that China has, behind closed doors, threatened Australia's sovereignty. And the Thucydides trap pretty much means that if the USA is pushed out of Asia, Australia is under extreme threat. This is not a joke, people. But before we get started, make sure you click the subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss out on anything. I've also got a Patreon. If I was to hit a critical mass on Patreon, I'd be able to pump out a ton more of these videos and you guys will be able to see everything that's going on in Asia. Let's get started.
So please join me in welcoming our very distinguished speaker, former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Thank you.
Thank you. China was about 5% of global GDP, India markedly less, and yet together they represented half the world's population. For most of recorded history, we know, thanks to the work of Angus Maddison, that these two demographic giants had represented around half of the global economy. And their rise, particularly that of China, has transformed, amazed, and in some respects frightened the world. Now, this long run of prosperity has only been possible because it was built on a foundation of security guaranteed by the military strength of the United States, upholding the rule of law. Now, I think we all recognise there is more cynicism and chauvinism about in international affairs right now. Protectionism is on the rise, and every man for himself seems to be a mantra attractive to many. Graham Allison made a reputation by writing about the Thucydides trap based on the contention in Book 1 that the real reason for the war between Athens and Sparta was not an elaborate series of coups and events in Kerkyra and Epidamnus, but rather that Sparta was anxious about the rise of Athenian power. So he argues that we need to be careful that concern about the rise of China does not cause us all to fall into that trap.
This is the Chinese Navy. A foreign military airplane, please go away quickly.
We've got to step back and look at all of China's activities.
The next president will face a quandary often called the Thucydides trap.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing.
There's a book coming out, in fact, by a professor at Harvard, Graham Allison, the dean of the Belfer Center, titled The Thucydides Trap.
Professor Allison coined this term to describe the strategic dilemma and dangers that occur when a rising power rivals a ruling power.
It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this inspired in Sparta that made war inevitable.
So note there's two variables, rise and fear.
Where you had a rapidly rising power confronting an established power ended in war.
In terms of outcome, most likely has ended in war.
I don't know, 80% of the time they clash.
The deck was sort of stacked against a peaceful world, at least probability-wise.
Professor Allison's term has caught the attention of many.
The challenge with China is the Thucydidean trap that people talk about.
Thucydides trap.
Thucydides trap.
Thucydides trap.
The Thucydides trap.
Thucydides trap.
Thucydides trap.
Thucydides trap.
Including President Xi Jinping of China.
There is no such thing as the so-called Thucydides trap in the world. But should major countries time and again make the mistakes of strategic miscalculation, they might create such traps for themselves.
There's another piece of wisdom from antiquity that says fear, honor, and interest always seem to be the root causes of why a nation chooses to go to hostilities.
I suspect he's probably the only one here at this table who can hear the words Thucydides trap and not have to go to Wikipedia to find out what it means.
Of course, Secretary Cohen has insulted every member of this committee by suggesting that we don't readily understand that.
Escaping Thucydides' trap to avoid war will require nothing short of bending the arc of history.
Now listen very closely to what Malcolm Turnbull is about to say. Keep in mind he is an experienced politician. Keep in mind that they talk in code. Read between the lines about what he's about to say now. In my opinion, he's hinting that China has, behind closed doors, explicitly threatened Australia's sovereignty. Now, listen to what he's going to say, rewind, watch it over and over again. You'll get what I'm trying to point out here.
Well, I think the more relevant part of Thucydides' history is in fact in Book 5, where he recounts the debate between the citizens of Melos, a neutral island city that wanted to remain just that, and the Athenian ambassadors who arrived having their eloquence supported by an army and told the Melians they were either with us or against us. Sounds familiar. When the Melians protested, calling fairness in aid, the Athenians did not simply remind them with a chilly cynicism that hope is danger's comforter, but added, you know, in this world justice is found only as between equals in power. As to the rest, the strong do as they will, and the weak suffer as they must. Now, the implications of this ancient dose of realpolitik is precisely what the rule of law is designed to prevent. Might should not be right. The strong should not do as they will, and the weak, or as Lee Kuan Yew said 50 years ago or more, the little shrimp should not be the prey of the strong. Australia sees the continued strong presence of the United States in our region as of vital importance to us, our neighbours and the world. Steady, consistent and determined continuity is vital. That's not to say or suggest that China's rise brings with it the inevitable consequence of coercion, but a strong and engaged America will ensure that the rule of law prevails. Now, I'm sure we'll cover other matters in our discussion, but today I wanted to talk about Australia's strategy in the region during my time as Prime Minister, a strategy which I have no doubt will be continued by my successor, Mr Morrison, and in all likelihood will continue even if there is a change of government at an election next year.
The Pew poll showed very strong support in Australia for the alliance. But there's one question that struck me. A number of Australians who think the US doesn't have Australia's back, doesn't look out for Australia's interests, is growing. And you've worked with this administration, and I wonder if you think that's fair, or how you might explain back to Canberra the way people should be thinking about it.
Well, I don't have any doubt that America's commitment to Australia has maintained absolute strength. I think Australia and the United States are each other's best allies. We certainly have no better allies, perhaps is probably the more tactful way to put it. But we are, our relationship, as so many of you in this room know, at a national security and intelligence point of view is as close as it possibly could be between two countries. The UK is very seriously looking at applying to join the TPP. I mean, they have a whole process underway. And you can imagine from their point of view, once they leave the European Union, if they can join the TPP, bingo, they've got free trade agreements with 11 other countries, and 15% or thereabouts of global GDP and trade.
I think in Washington, it's probably fair to say there's if not ASEAN fatigue, skepticism after the 2016 decision by the tribunal regarding the Philippines case and the way Beijing was able to prevent ASEAN from putting out a joint statement. I was actually living in Phnom Penh. I was living in Phnom Penh that summer with my family, and Hun Sen's spokesman said, $600 million, that's a lot of money. It was very transparent about the transactional way that China rented Cambodia's vote. And in subsequent discussions about a code of conduct, Beijing has succeeded in using other governments within ASEAN to table things like a ban on foreign ships, American and Australian ships transiting the contested areas. Are we playing defense on ASEAN? Are we trying to keep it from falling apart? Or do you sense that there's more we can do to move it forward? Not just the members of ASEAN, but the organization
Well, I mean,
itself.
there are some different agendas between some of the ASEAN countries and others, but I think the centrality and importance of ASEAN remains. But when you're talking about the People's Liberation Navy, realistically, the only force that can balance it in the region is the United States Navy. Now, I don't want to fall into the Thucydides trap any more than anyone else, but the continued engagement of the US in the region is of vital importance, and it provides enormous reassurance. And you've got to remember that the prosperity of the region, including the prosperity of China, has been underpinned by that peace that has continued in the region for over 40 years. It's often called the Pax Americana, but the United States power supporting values of the rule of law has been the sheet anchor that has enabled all of this prosperity to be delivered.
Who's speaking on China.
Yep.
And I understand he's going to mention Senator Dostieri as an example of Chinese influence campaigns, sharp power. You spoke up about that, and your government saw through legislation to close loopholes. You also flagged very clearly, and I think decisively, concerns about Chinese building in Vanuatu. How do you see the state of Australia's relationship with China and this question of sharp power?
Well, look, the relationship is good, and it must be based on mutual respect. I mean, our sovereignty is as important to us as it is to every other nation in the region, including China. So China states that its policy and commitment is not to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, and we acknowledge that, and we want to be sure that Australian politics is managed by Australians. Some would sometimes contentiously, of course, but nonetheless it's our political system to run and nobody else's. Do everything we can to maintain the harmony, the rule of law, the peace that we've seen in the region for a long time, and that has required, that certainly led me as PM and my government to take, I would say, more proactive steps than we have historically. In terms of One Belt, One Road investments, we welcome them wherever they are, as long as they are on terms that support economic development, good governance, loans that are at high rates that result in assets, effectively being, foreclosed on by the lender, as the Sri Lankans have found out in the Hambantota port. That's not a great outcome. So we feel the biggest, if you were to identify the biggest barrier to more investment from countries like Australia or the EU or the United States in the region or in developing nations generally, it is basically all about rule of law. But from our point of view, the more engaged the United States is in the world, the better. And in those institutions, you've got to be, if you're out of the room, you're out of the deal. And so you're better off being involved. History is made by those who turn up, and if you don't turn up, you're not there, someone else will make the history. So a more engaged America is, from our point of view in Australia, is absolutely beneficial. And if I may just offer a thought from the American perspective, it's easy in a huge country like the United States to focus solely on the domestic market. But just as it was once said, you may not be interested in the war, but the war is interested in you. You may not be interested in global affairs, but the world, global affairs, is interested in you and has a big impact, and we're more globally connected now than ever. So, I would, my counsel, but it comes as an Australian, none of my business at one level, to how Americans determine their domestic politics. The more engaged America is, the better. If you look at Western democracy from a Chinese point of view, and I mean, Tom Friedman basically wrote a book about this, you would say you can understand why there is some skepticism from a Chinese Beijing point of view. I mean, they would say that their system has delivered extraordinary economic growth, and it has. It's delivered infrastructure, cities, industries, technology at a scale and pace never seen before. And the premise of democracy, we've got to recognise, is not necessarily accepted everywhere. I remember when I was in Shenyang in about 1994, because I had a lot of to do in China in the early 90s. I established a mine there, in fact, though it was in another province, in Hebei province, a big zinc mine. But I remember the governor of Liaoning province said to me, we were discussing this, and he said, just because the majority of people want to do something doesn't mean it's right. Now, if you're focused on outcomes only, you can understand that point of view, but deep in our DNA is a fundamental respect for the dignity of every single human being and their right as an individual to have their say, even if they're wrong. Now, we hope that sound debate and the CSIS and other great think tanks will encourage good policy and good outcomes. But it is it depends from which way you look at it. But we should not imagine that the assumption that is imbued in us, that democracy, the right of every individual to have an equal say, we should not assume that is seen as being self-evident everywhere in the world. And equally, by the way, even more so, the rule of law is not seen as self-evident. There are a lot of places in the world where democracy is understood as simply majoritarianism. In other words, 50% plus one get to run the show. Whereas the rule of law, as we know, the genius of the rule of law is at the same time as it empowers the majority, it constrains the majority. So it says, yes, if you're the majority, you can be in government, but you can't do what you like to people, and there are, laws that govern, the humblest citizen and the most haughty ruler. In a rule of law country, and that is, again, that's not, you see with the Arab Spring how the rule of law was not understood because majorities seized power and then wanted to do their worst to minorities. So there are a lot of the things that we hold as self-evident that are not seen as such around the world, and it's why countries like Australia and the United States need to speak to those values and defend them and propound them and live them now more than ever, because they are contested now more than ever.
I think this is the best way to end the video. The Chinese within Australia, not all, there's a lot of Australian Chinese that respect other people's opinions and do not try to silence them. But if you look at my last two videos, this is evidence of a Chinese website and Chinese people, hundreds of them. There was possibly 200 people, Chinese people living within Australia, that came to my last couple videos, thumbs them down, death threats, violent threats, tried to find where I live, tried to report my video, made my video age restricted, did everything they could to try silence me. This website also made up lies about me, all because of my opinions. You see, I respect the Chinese people's opinions, But it's been made very clear that the Chinese do not respect my opinion. So what choice do I have but to double down and fight back harder? You can't silence me. You'll have to kill me. But if you like this video, make sure you click the subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss out on anything. I've also got a Patreon if you want to support me so I can pump out a ton more of these videos and get the word out. Share this to any Australian living within Australia, or any American, or anybody that is relevant to this debate. Don't let fear stop you.